Hello everyone and welcome to Quality Old Games. Today we are making another tier list from Rome Total War, and this time it's going to be a unit tier list from Romans factions units, and we are going to make it by the campaign play, so the list may differ from multiplayer battle unit list or from single battle unit list. And we are going to make the list by unit type, and we will begin with Cavalry. And as the first unit we have Cavalry Auxilia, a late game Primarian unit. I will put it in C tier because their missiles are quite in limited supply. They don't have many of them, and after they have used them up, which will happen pretty quickly, they won't serve as well as regular cavalry. Of course, they have their uses in some situations, but because of the low number of missiles they have, they earn a place in C tier. Then we have Equites, another Primarian reform unit, and it's most definitely better than Cavalry Auxilia, but not nearly as good as late game cavalry. And it will be needed because it's in the early game, in addition to generals, the only cavalry unit you can have. So in Primarian reforms, it's in possibly in A tier, but later it will drop into B or C tier, so I will put it in the middle, in the B tier. Then we have the early Roman general, once again Primarian unit, and in the early game it's a really good general unit. Actually, it's the only heavy cavalry unit that Romans have in the early game, and as such I think it will deserve a strong A tier or weak S tier, and let's put it in A tier, as it has 2 hit points and it can really cause heavy damage and cause many units to rout if it attacks from behind. Then our first unit after Marian reforms is Roman armored general, and this is definitely S tier because it has 2 hit points, it's heavily armored, it can cause devastating damage with its attacks, and it's kind of no recruitment cost as it comes along with the general. Same applies to the early general's bodyguard. But this armored bodyguard is so much better that it deserves absolutely S tier. Then we have legionary cavalry here. It's heavy cavalry. It takes 2 turns to build. That kind of limits its usage. And additionally it requires quite high tier stables to build. So it might be low A tier or good B tier, but I think I will put it in B because we have pretty similar situation with Praetorian cavalry here. It takes 2 turns to build, but it's in every way stronger than the legionary cavalry. Of course, it will require 1 tier higher stables to build, but it's so much better that I think it deserves A tier instead of the B tier. And then we have Roman cavalry. It kind of replaces Equites after Marian reforms. But as the Romans have access to much better cavalry than this one, it will deserve a B tier. The good thing for going for it is that it requires only basic stables, and it requires 1 turn to build. So that's a good thing compared to legionary and Praetorian cavalry. And that's for the cavalry units. By the way, the late general's bodyguard and Praetorian cavalry seem to have the similar image in the game. Interesting. Then it's time to move to infantry, which will almost always form the bulk of the Roman army. And as the first unit, we have post-Marian auxilia, pretty light spear infantry. As the post-Marian Romans don't have another spear infantry, I think that earns this auxilia place in B tier. If there were other spear infantry units, especially better than this one, it would have dropped this one to C tier. Then we have early legionary cohort. I think it's a superb unit, and the reason for this is that it's very much better than the pre-Marian infantry, namely Triarii, Principes, and Hastati, and it requires only decent tier, level 3 tier barracks to build. So, especially if you are fighting against barbarians, which may have not so developed cities as the Greeks, Egyptians, Carthaginians, and so on, you may still be able to retrain the early legionary cohorts. That's what makes them pretty decent. And then we have the early legionary first cohort. They are nice, have a significantly larger number of men than the basic cohort, but the problem is that you can only build them in row. They are good units, very good ones, boosting the morale around them, but since it's in limited supply where you can build it, that's why it earns a place in A tier. Then we have Hastati, the early game pre-Marian basic infantry unit. Personally, I really like this unit. It's kind of the backbone of the Roman armies in the early period, and it can hold quite well against especially barbarian warbands, but it's weak if the enemy has other than militia hoplites in phalanx. So it's really hard to break those phalanxes with Hastati only. But since it requires only the second tier barracks to build, that goes for it, and it's relatively cheap unit, I think it earns a place in A tier. Then we have legionary cohort. It's pretty similar to the early legionary cohort, except it's better fighter, but it requires 1 tier higher barracks to build, level 4 or tier 4 barracks. And that's kind of problematic, especially if you are fighting barbarians or some eastern factions that don't have good barracks, because then you need to combine the units or send them back quite long distances to retrain before you can build your own high enough barracks to retrain them. So I think because of that they deserve a lower place than the early legionary cohorts. And then we have the first cohort of legionary cohorts, and here once again the limiting factor will be that it can only be constructed in or built in Rome, and usually in Rome you have high enough barracks to build these, so I think these are better than the early legionary first cohorts. That's the reason why their places are this. Then we have peasants, and maybe surprisingly I will put them to S tier, and actually right after the general. They are among the best units in the game. Not in fight. In fight they are trash. But if you need to keep up public order in cities, these peasant groups have very many men, so recruiting them will lower the population, and as they are such numerous, they have such many men in the unit, it will boost the public order in city pretty much. in the garrison-wise. So basically, because of that, they are S-tier units. In my campaigns, almost always the largest cities will have garrisons consisting only of peasants, if they are not next to an enemy. So I at least use them very much. And they are cheap, and they are cheap to maintain. Much cheaper than any of the real fighting units. And if the city is under siege, and these are in the city square, they can hold their own, not well, but not terribly either. Then we have Praetorian cohorts. Another, well, you could say that Praetorian cohorts come before Marian reforms, but as the first imperial palace often triggers the Marian reforms, they basically come after the reforms. And you require an imperial palace to build them, so they don't require barracks, which is kind of thing going for them, especially when you are fighting Egypt, Seleucids, some other factions that have really developed cities. Then Praetorian cohorts are easily available and you can easily retrain them. Of course, when you are fighting barbarians, they are not as good. But because of the kind of lower requirements, I will put them as a weak S tier. They are superb fighters. One Praetorian cohort can beat legionary cohort, and their specialty is high morale as well, or good discipline, so they rarely break. Then we have Principes, a heavier version of Hastati in the Primarian period, and they are better fighters than Hastati. But often in the early game, cities are not big enough to support the tier 3 barracks that this unit requires, or you can't afford to build them or can't wait to build them. So kind of these reasons make it a bit weaker campaign-wise than Hastati. And because of that, I will put them into B tier. You can retrain them in some cities, but often retraining Principes is also problematic. So that's why I at least prefer Hastati to these Principes. Then we have Town Watch. They are absolutely trash. They are not good fighters. They are not good at keeping order compared to peasants. So there is basically no need for you to build them in any case. Of course, when there is a kind of level 1 city where you have the militia barracks or the tier 1 barracks, and you suspect you are going to be attacked soon and you cannot get any real fighting units in the city, then as a desperate measure you may want to build Town Watch, but in any other case there is no reason to build them. Then we have another Primarian infantry unit, Triarii, and they are considered the veterans of the Roman army. And they have the highest morale of the units. But otherwise than fighting cavalry, they are surprisingly weak. So, and they cost quite a bit, also as to maintain, and they require tier 4 barracks to build them. So basically in the early game, it's very rare that you have overall an opportunity to build them. And as they are the only spear unit you can build, I think that could put them in weak B position, but I think they are going to go into C tier. Well, don't make except in dire need you don't have often the means to make them. So that's why they earned a place in C tier. Then we have urban cohorts. And these are the best infantry unit that the Roman factions have available. They are kind of an even a bit upgraded version of Praetorian cohort, Praetorian Guard cohort. And they are really good units. The problem is that they require tier 5 barracks to construct, and it's very rare that you are going to end up having a city with tier 5 barracks. Of course, that's possible in the late game, but then again, it's pretty rare that enemies have sufficient barracks that you can retrain them. Of course, if you manage to build a stack that comprises mostly of urban cohorts, that can really well act as a doom stack. But it will kind of be difficult to maintain the fighting ability of that doom stack. Because of these reasons, I think urban cohorts will go to B tier. Do not misunderstand me, it's a really great unit, but it's so difficult to maintain and produce, and it takes 2 turns to produce. So that's the reason it doesn't get any higher rank. And now we have completed infantry, excluding the special units, which we will return later, and it's time to rate Roman missile units, excepting the cavalry, cavalry auxilia, which was rated as part of cavalry. We have first as archer auxilia the post-Marian archery unit, and it is very good. It can stand toe-to-toe against most enemy archery units. It has long-range missiles. It requires only tier 2 archery range to build. So because of that, it deserves at least strong A tier, maybe here, or even low S tier. Because many of the mechanics or the problems with the AI, you can utilize archery units really well in the campaign. So maybe because of that, I will give archer auxilia S tier, low S tier. Then we have light auxilia. Once again, a post-Marian unit, and usually in post-Marian game, you have those tier 2 archery ranges to build archer auxilia. So in most cases, there is no need to build light auxilia. Of course, if you have low tier city where you cannot build archer auxilia and you need some missile units, then you can make them. So these are trash or maybe low C tier. I think I will put them into trash. They are not as bad as Town Watch, but basically in the game, in the campaign, you don't want to make light auxilia. Then we have Roman archers, Primarian unit. They are quite a bit weaker compared to archer auxilia. Their missiles aren't as strong, they are more lightly armored, and they have lower range, and in early game you often don't have the required archery range to build them. If you had, I think this would be a unit in many armies, but since often you don't have the possibility, that puts these units into B tier. Basically because it's so difficult to get them. You have one unit often initially, but it will most likely be the only archer unit you have in the early game. And then we have Velites. They are pretty similar to light auxilia, but in the early game they are more useful. They are kind of the only missile unit you often have a possibility to make. So they have quite a few missiles, and after that they can act as a light reserve troop if you need them, if the need is dire. But at least I make them somewhat, so they are a bit higher level than the C tier, maybe low B tier. Of course, against enemy phalanxes, they may be pretty decent, as your light infantry often can make a dent, at least in hand-to-hand combat with both sides facing each other squarely. So in those cases, but often the Peltasts or mercenaries or Illyrian mercenaries are superb to Velites, so maybe you can use them against barbarians and so on, but not very much. And actually the missile unit list was quite short, and we are moving to siege weapons. And as first one we have Ballista. I think I'm a bit biased against siege weapons. Of course, they are in most cases illustrated as a Roman specialty. Romans were great siege engineers and so on. But in the campaign map, they slow down the army, and that causes some problems. And oftentimes they have time to shoot only a small percentage of their projectiles, and because of that I don't usually use them. Okay, they are in some cases pretty useful to taking down city walls, and if the enemy has large army in tight formation, then especially the onagers will be useful. And of course these smaller siege weapons can be used to snipe high quality enemy infantry or cavalry for that matter. But usually I don't make these. So Ballista is the basic unit. It requires tier 2 archery range to build, the same level as Roman archers and archer auxilia, but I always prefer those archers to these. So basically, at least I don't make ballistas. I don't see any reason or situation where I would want to make ballistas instead of archers or archer auxilia. Then we have heavy onagers. They require tier 4 archery range, and since you need to have tier 2 city to build tier 1 archery range, they will require tier 5 city, meaning Imperial Palace. And these do decent damage against walls, so that could kind of be going for them. And of course you can smash phalanxes with these from far off, but in the campaign I really don't use them. Maybe I should use them more, but since the requirements for these are such high ones, I don't once again see a reason why I would want to build these. The same goes for ordinary onagers. They have a kind of smaller requirements, so they are a bit better than the heavy ones. Maybe I could put these heavy ones to... No, they are not trash, but they are not that good either. And then we have repeating ballistas. Once again, the requirements go up a bit. So even one more reason not to make them, because it's kind of rare situation you have T4 archery unit construction facilities. But maybe I will put these heavy onagers before those. And then we have Scorpion. It's kind of the same series as Ballistas. So basically, at least I don't make them. Maybe against enemy war elephants or cataphracts, they might be decent. But usually when you are far enough in the game to face those units, you have enough legionaries and archery auxiliaries and so on, so that and heavy cavalry as well. So you don't need those siege engines there. And as said before, they make armies move slower, and that's problematic as well. So hopefully I'm not too harsh on the siege engines here, or siege units. And then we have special units left. We have Arcani, first one. I guess they are the Julii special units and can be built if you have high tier enough a temple. I don't often make them. They are expert at hiding. They can cause some surprises, but compared to legionary cohort, early legionary cohort, you can get in one turn. And this one, which requires 2 turns, there are only 60, 80 men compared to 160 of legionary cohort. It really cannot do that much. Of course, it could cause enemy to flee a bit more easier, but still, I don't see any use for it. It's pretty decent in battle, but why to build it? Because you have so much better units going for you. And usually in cities that have high enough tier temples to recruit Arcani, you can have almost always early legionary cohorts or legionary cohorts. So I don't think Arcani will be used. Then we have incendiary pigs that are supposed to be used against elephants. So the tactics here is that you kind of fire and forget them and literally fire these pigs, and they should make elephants to panic. In some cases it may be so, but why would you want to have a unit in your army that is good only against one type of enemy unit, while you can have, for example, archers or archer auxiliaries instead? So these pigs are, in my opinion, trash as well. I don't almost never use them. Then we have gladiators, and the first one here, I guess this is the Scipii version of gladiators? Was it Milo gladiator or so on? Gladiators also take 2 turns to complete, and as such, they are not, at least my favorite unit to use in battle. The number of gladiators in one unit is pretty small, and they don't fight that well in place of, for example, legionary cohort. The good thing going for them is that they have high morale, and because of that they could be used in some places, but I think most of the infantry units can beat them. And another thing going for them is that they can be recruited from amphitheater. So a building that improves public order and brings as a benefit the gladiator unit or possibility to train it. So if you are having a city that has no real army producing capabilities, but you have an amphitheater, a highly unlikely situation, but in those cases you might want to build gladiators. But then again, they are not that good. Maybe I would build these before those siege engines, but I think they are not in the campaign that good that I would often use them. Then we have another special unit, Warhound, and they can be accessed in early game as well, and as they are available at the same tier 1 stables as equites, and they take 2 turns to build. That's kind of a minus for them, but on the positive side, the population requirements are very small, and as there are 48 kind of dog handlers, there are almost 200 war dogs, or at least 150 if the handlers are counted to the figure as well. And these are excellent at frightening enemies, running them down if they are fleeing, and kind of fire and forget weapon which you can unleash on the enemy. And because of that, I think they deserve a place in A tier. I don't really make them that often if I have a possibility to make, for example, equites. So maybe I should put them into B tier after all. Maybe here. But they are nonetheless good units, and kind of their easiness in commanding battle speaks for them. So let's make a quick glance about the roster here. So I think most definitely these are S tier units. Maybe I will put Archer Auxilia before Praetorian Cohort, actually, yeah. And then we have A tier. I think the Praetorian Cohort needs to make way to the Legionary Cohort. And then, let's see, the Legionary Cavalry is a bit low. Maybe it could go 1 tier higher. Yes, we can put it there. And here, kind of the urban cohort here stings to the eye. Maybe it should be replaced. On the other hand, the requirements for it are so high that maybe it is where it should be. And then C tier. Yeah, I think these are pretty okay. And D tier. I guess this is pretty much correct. Maybe I should put the Arcane a bit higher here, because the gladiators are here. But at least I don't think I will put any of these 4 units to B tier. So, what do you think about that? Maybe you have different preferences in the campaign. How would you change this tier list, or is it okay? Do you find yourself in similar position regarding the quality of Roman factions units? Post in a comment what you think about the list, and of course you are always you can always differ from my opinion. It's only my opinion, not necessarily the truth, or it can reflect one aspect of truth. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much for watching. Quality Old Games out.